And final teller is Kathy Gordon, who was very fortunate to have been born into an Appalachian family. Instead of growing up with nursery rhymes, she grew up with stories of the mountains. But the story she's going to tell you is from different mountains, and it is called The Three Fays. Thank you.
I've got to, am I on? Said, okay, I've got to follow that. Gee whiz, three wonderful tellers. I usually tell stories about my childhood and my growing up in the mountains. I'm not going to do that today because I'm supposed to tell a fairy tale. And I tried to make one up and it just wasn't as good as this one I found. I have to tell you where I got this story. I taught school in Asheville City Schools for 30 years. And after I retired, I got a job as a reading tutor in the school where Martha Hayes taught. I just realized she's sitting back there. And one day when the children I was supposed to be working with were somewhere else, I went into Martha's library and sat down. And I knew what section the storybooks were. I sat down back there and I looked on the shelf and I saw a book that said The Fabric of Fairy Tales. Well, I'm a quilter, and I've sewn my own clothes since I was in high school. And that interested me, so I pulled it off and started reading it, and I fell in love with that book, and I thought about stealing it, but I didn't. I put it back on the shelf, and when I got home, I went right to Amazon, and I found it. So this story is from that book. It's called The Three Fays. Now, today I looked up to make sure you understood what a fae is. This story comes from Sweden, and a fae is like a fairy, but it's not. Fairies are very small, and fays are not as big as a grown person, but not as small as a fairy. This is called The Three Fays. And once again, it's a fairy tale. It's a love story, but with another twist. There was a young maiden, a young girl, who lived with her mother down the end of a lane. And if you saw that little cottage, you would be so in love with it because it was a typical little cottage. But it was the most beautiful little cottage because the garden, there was a whole garden around it with all kinds of plants and flowers, and all down the lane were plants and flowers. And that was because that young maiden spent all her time going in the woods and digging up plants and digging up flowers and bringing them and planting them around. Well, her mother was a spinner, and she could spin the most beautiful flax. She could take flax and spin. It was just, she made the most beautiful flax that you could weave with or anything with. She was known in all the land about being this wonderful spinner. And she wanted her daughter to be a spinner too. She tried to get her to come in, and no, I'm digging. And the mother would say, look at your hands. Your hands are always dirty. Your fingernails are always dirty. You're always out there in the dirt. You're in the woods in the dirt. You're out here in the dirt. You are never, ever going to get a husband that way. Yeah, I jazzed it up a little bit. You are never, ever going to get a husband doing such things like that. She said, I don't want a husband. I'm happy doing what I'm going to do. You have to have a husband. Every woman needs a husband. So this goes on and on and on, and she would never come in and learn to spin. And one day the mother had it, and she got very angry, and she went outside, and she had some of that flax in her hand. And the girl was out there working in the dirt and getting plants and all, and she whacked the girl over her body with that flax. And the girl stood up and said, what did you do that for? And she said, because you've got to get a husband. Someday I'm not going to be here, and you're not going to have a husband, and nobody's going to take care of you. So she said, Mom, I told you I don't want to do that. I don't want to spin. So she kept hitting her and yelling at her and hitting her and yelling at her till the girl just started crying and crying and crying and said, please leave me alone. Well, about that time, this beautiful carriage came by, and it stopped, and out stepped the queen. And she said, why is this girl crying? And the mother said, oh, because she spins. She loves to spin. And I've got her out here digging in the dirt and working in these flowers and plants. And we're just having a real hard time. And the queen said, you got anything that you've spun? And the mother said, yes, I do. And she went in and got some of her own stuff and brought it out and said, look what my daughter can do. The queen said, you can do this? And the daughter's going, And she said, would you like to come with me and live in the palace and spin for me? The mother said, yes, she would. And she got her some clean clothes and got her into the carriage before the girl could even say anything about it. So here she's going to the palace to spin. She got there, and the queen didn't take her up into the palace. She took her in this basement room that was filled with flax up to the ceiling and a spinning wheel. And the queen said, I'll be back in the morning to see how much you've done. So she sat down amongst all that flax and started to cry. And suddenly, a little woman appeared out of nowhere. Of course she did. She appeared out of nowhere, and she looked like a regular little small woman, except her right foot was really big. It was like this big flap that came out on the front of it. And she didn't ask her about it. The little woman said, why are you crying? And she said, it's because I've been left here to spin all this flax into yarn, and I don't know how to spin. And the woman said, I can spin that for you. Would you like me to? Yes, I would. And she said, but I have to ask you something. Why is your foot so big? She said, well, it's because I've spent my whole life spinning. And this is the foot that I push the pedal with to spin. And my foot has gotten really big. The girl said, okay. And just like that, the little woman cast a spell on her. And she fell into a deep sleep. And when she woke up the next morning, she was in a room filled with the most beautiful spun flax that you could ever imagine. She was in this room and she's like, how did this happen? The little woman was nowhere in sight. In comes the queen. Oh, my dear, you spin even more beautiful than your mother said. This is incredible. I need you to weave this into cloth. She said, but I'll be back tomorrow to see your handiwork. So the girl is there crying and trying to figure out what she's going to do. She doesn't even know what a loom is. She's never even seen one. What's she going to do? When suddenly, there's another little woman in there. She said, oh, I thought you might need me since my sister was here yesterday. She said, yeah, can you help me? She said, yes. But this little woman was different from the woman before in that she was all bent over like this. She walked like this. And she said, you can weave for me? Yes, I can weave for you. She said, but why are you all bent over like that? She said, oh, it's because I'm bent over the loom, pushing the shuttle back and forth, that over the years I've just grown bent over. She said, oh, but I can weave for you. I can make this flax into fabric. Okay. The little woman said, but there's one thing I ask. My sister and I would like to come to your wedding. I don't know that there's going to be a wedding. There'll be a wedding. And we ask you to call us, your aunts, and invite us to your wedding. Well, at this point, the girl would have done anything and promised anything to have this little woman help her. So just like that, the little woman put a spell on her, and she fell fast asleep. And when she woke up the next morning, the room was full of the most beautiful cloth you can imagine that had all that flax that had been spun into this beautiful, beautiful cloth. And the little woman's going, oh my goodness gracious, what am I going to tell the queen? When about that time the door burst open. And the queen came in and she said, I was hoping this would be this way. You see, I've got this son, and I have insisted that he find a beautiful woman that could spin and weave to be his wife. And she's like, I don't know about this, but okay. And she said, I want you to take this fabric, this cloth, and make him a beautiful shirt to wear to your wedding. She said, okay. And the queen left. And you know what happens? Another little woman comes, another little fae. Except this woman didn't have a big foot, and she wasn't all big bent over. She had a thumb that was really, really big. And she said, do you need me, my dear? And the girl said, I don't know. We've already, one little woman has come and spun the flax into yarn, and another little woman came and used the loom and wove this beautiful, beautiful cloth. And now I'm supposed to make a shirt. And she said, I can do that for you. You see, my thumb's so big from pushing the needle through the cloth. All my life, I pushed the needle. There's only one thing I ask. I understand you said my sisters could come to the wedding. Yes, there's not going to be a wedding, but I guess so. And she said, oh yes, there'll be a wedding. And you can come, if you'll come, I want to come to your wedding, and I want you to call me like them, your aunt. Okay. So she said, a spell was cast, and she fell fast asleep. She woke up the next morning, and there was a beautiful shirt. Had ruffles, and it was just beautiful. Ready for a prince to wear to his wedding. But there was one more thing. There was a beautiful wedding dress there with ruffles and lace. It was just gorgeous. And the girl looked at that dress and thought, what are they doing? I don't understand this. And the queen comes in. Oh my goodness, you've made the most beautiful shirt for my son to wear to his wedding, and you've made yourself a wedding dress. Behind the queen's back, she's going, I don't even know this man. I've never seen this man, and they want me to marry him. So she was taken upstairs to have breakfast. This beautiful ballroom was all laid out with all this breakfast to eat. And there was a young man standing at the end looking out the window. He had his back to her. She didn't pay attention to him. She started to be served a plate, and the young man turned around. And they looked at each other, and it's a fairy tale, okay? They looked at each other and fell madly in love with each other right there. Oh. So they walked in the gardens, they walked in the woods, and they talked, and they found out each one loved the same thing as the other one. And so the wedding day was set. They went and they sent for her mother. They sent a fine carriage to get for her mother, and her mother was so happy. that her daughter was not only getting married, but she was marrying a prince. And then the very last carriage to come was a great big gourd carriage. And it was pulled by 4 of big, fat mice was pulling this carriage. And when the door opened, out came first this big foot came out. And this little woman that was attached to it gets out. Next came the top of the head from the one that was all bent over. And the third one got out, and you could tell exactly who she was because she had that big thumb on her right hand. So the wedding ceremony happened. And at the head table, there was her mother and her 3 aunts, the king and queen, and the prince and the new bride was sitting at another table. And the 3 fays came over to talk to them. She introduced to her new husband these 3 little women. And he said to her after they left, "What is wrong with those women? One has a big foot, one is all bent over, and one's got a big thumb. And they're your family?" And she said, "Yes. One spins, and that's her foot. It's made her foot that big. And one's all bent over from sending the shuttle back and forth on the loom. And one's thumb is from pushing the needle." And he said, "Well, I don't want you to look like that. I don't want you to ever spin and make your foot big. I don't want you to be bent over at the loom. And I definitely don't want you to have that great thumb." He said, "Let's just walk in the garden or in the woods. Maybe we might find some plants in the woods that we could come and plant in the garden around the palace." And the girl said, "Maybe we could do that." And so they spent their life digging up plants in the woods and bringing them to the garden at the palace. And you know what happened? You can help me. They lived happily ever after. Thank you.